I'm really excited today because we've got a really awesome webinar of really amazing, articulate people with brilliant minds who are doing a lot to spread the story and narrative and science behind water cycle restoration all around the world. And it's really amazing to see just all the connections and the things that come from written media. And it's so powerful and it spreads so wide and it's changing so much. And, some of the biggest, most hopeful projects and interests I've had have come through some of these people here today. And it's really amazing to see just how things have evolved and how much success is coming from working with water. And just a little bit of a insider from the UN General Assembly, they're saying people tied into our US government were saying, Republicans and Democrats, they can't decide on anything. They're shutting down the government. The one thing they can decide on is water, and that we have big issues with water. We're facing big challenges and we need to do something about it. So these are the people who have really been helping change that story. And I'm really excited to start out first with a friend of mine from Vermont, lives very close to where I grew up, and amazing author, Judith Schwartz.
Thank you, Zach, and hello, everybody. And thank you to my fellow panelists who I haven't had as a group together before, which is wonderful. So how did I get into water? Zach was talking about how the conversation about water has changed. And I would say that from a journalistic perspective, water was kind of a backwater for a long time. No one ever wrote about it or thought about it unless there was a problem. So if there's a big drought, if there's a big flood, then, then it's a story, and then it went quiet. And when there were big droughts and floods, they often tended to be elsewhere, So here in the US, you could say, oh, isn't that terrible? There's a drought in Zimbabwe or something. But really, it wasn't on people's minds that much until the California drought that in 2012, 13, 14. And I noticed at that point, so I had just written, audiovisual, this book about soil, Cows Save the Planet, and Other Improbable Ways of Restoring Soil to Heal the Earth, which did have a lot of material about water. And what I noticed two things that brought me more deeply into the topic. One thing is that when like the California drought, when people were talking about it, that it was always a matter of what does or doesn't come down from the sky. So having just written a book about soil, I realized we can't really talk about water or lack of water or too much water without also talking about land and how we manage land. And the other thing is that what I learned in writing a book about soil is the extent to which that land is connected to water, but also how water is connected to climate. And I noticed that in our policy conversations about climate, when water was mentioned, it only went in one direction, which was that climate change will put added stress on water sources throughout the world, which of course is true. But what was missing was the effect that water has on climate. And if we step back and ask, how does the earth manage heat? It's largely through the phase changes of water, which transfer and release and store tremendous amounts of heat energy. And that is really good news because we have a great deal of agency in terms of working with the water cycle. So then those two questions or those two observations led me to write this book, Water in Plain Sight, Hope for a Thirsty World. And actually, the book was originally assigned to me. The original contract was something about the politics of water. Okay. But as I started researching, I got really, really interested in water processes and how water works. So water infiltration, transpiration, and condensation. And just got very excited about that. And it turned out that in my reporting, I kept bumping into stories that were about various water processes and showed how water connects with all the flood, drought, and wildfire scenarios, but also biodiversity, climate, and peace and conflict. There, we got the politics in. But so I'll just give an example about how it all intertwines. Then I'll tell a very brief story from the book. So, in terms of biodiversity, I spent some time in the Chihuahua Desert at ranches where they were doing holistic plan grazing to build rich soil, get more grass coming up, and support biodiversity in terms of the birds. Okay, they were working with bird conservation organizations, and it made sense to me that the healthier the water cycle, the more biodiversity we would have. But what I didn't expect and what I did find is that the greater the biodiversity, the healthier, the higher functioning the water cycle, because all the critters from earthworms to prairie dogs and all in between were creating the conditions for water to meander more slowly through the land, through the soil, so that water would stay in the landscape and it wouldn't just sluice off. So I thought that was really, really interesting. Okay, the really, really brief story that's in the book is also in the book is about I encountered a couple that got all of their water from dew. And they didn't know how much water they were actually getting until the day 4 months after the last rainfall that the water tank overflowed. Hello. Sorry. So when the water tank overflowed and they thought, oh, this is really weird. Maybe it's blocked up. But Marcus, this is Catherine and Marcus Ottmers in far west Texas, a really blazing hot and dry place. I still remember that there were bumper stickers all over. Terlingua, hotter than hell, cooler than shit. So, that was the vibe of the place, but it was really hot and really dry. And, so Marcus checked, he got up at like 4 a.m. before the coolest time of day when you would get the most water and he wanted to see. And indeed, the water was flowing tremendously. So this was all because of the heat differential on their roof system, which itself was modeled on the Namib beetle that collects dew to survive. And they were getting about 60 to 70 gallons of water a day. This place where everybody else was complaining of lack of water. So there are many ways to work with the water cycle, many people out there who are being really, really creative. And yeah, I let's see what the rest of you have to share. And of course, I'll be joining in the Q&A. Thank you.
Awesome. What a story. That's really amazing. Just shows the potential of the aerial rivers in the sky, even in such a dry place. And I forgot to mention, as we go along, feel free, folks, to enter your questions into the Q&A. After all the presentations, we'll get to a Q&A period. So feel free to put them in there or in the chat. The Q&A is better if possible. Next up, we have someone who's come onto the scene in the last couple of years and just exploded out of the gates, pulling all sorts of science together, making a really awesome newsletter, and really bringing this narrative to all sorts of different people, different stakeholders of different types. Alpha Low.
Oh, well, I'm really glad to be here. Yeah, I was living in California, and during starting like around the 2010s, there was huge amounts of wildfires, like one after the other. And sometimes, I'd be there just looking at the red sky and smelling the smoke for days. And, and many of my friends had to leave the cities. And one time I was actually in a permaculture place in Grass Valley, and the fires just got so close, and we actually had to evacuate. And after that, I was like, well, yeah. So my background at that time was I'd been in physics graduate school. And then after that, I went and started working at different permaculture places and getting into that whole world. I love the whole design thing and living more in tune with nature, and and designing our nature systems, our agricultural systems, to be in alignment with that. And I was like, there's got to be some permaculture solution to the water, to the fire problem in California, because they were just talking about chopping down trees. And I stumbled upon this video by a young Zach Weiss with a TEDx talk about, you can actually restore the small water cycle, where small water cycle being where the water transpires from the land and then comes back down as rain. And you could hydrate the land more by holding the more water. And so both those things, hydrating the land for longer and then also bringing back the rains, is a different way to approach the whole fire issue, which is, troubling me and or a lot of the people I knew. And then I read a book by Climate by Charles Eisenstein, which talked about how maybe water is just as important, if not more important, than the carbon cycle in the whole climate, because it's a self-organizing system of water. And so I just started getting into this whole field, started meeting so many amazing people, and I organized a Regenerative Water Alliance and started connecting with some of these people. And then I remember seeing Judith Schwartz's book in the bookstore. I was like, wow, someone's been working on this with water in plain sight. So it's kind of amazing now that I'm on this with Zach Weiss and Judith Schwartz. And then I think also Layla, I saw Erica Weiss's Geese's book that came out too, The Water Always Wins. And so it's really amazing to be here, and also with Ali, who I've been talking to a lot. And after I kind of got that Regenerative Water Alliance going, where we put on water webinars and stuff, I started saying, well, I actually want to do research more into this. And so I was looking around for some place to put my thoughts, and I stumbled upon this newer thing at that time. It was like 4 years ago, Substack. And I was like, oh, I could put my thoughts and people read them. And it just slowly grew. And now, like, it's amazing how many water professionals and government people and others like follow my Substack. It's called the Climate Water Project, and and people are looking to invest, and so it's a really good way to get the voice out there. And I get to put a lot of my ideas out there, and also I have a podcast associated with it, the Climate Water Project podcast, where I get to interview a lot of really cool people. In fact, I think I've interviewed, Erica, Zach, and Judith on the podcast. And then at some point I was like, because I always felt like I left academia, like I still love research. And I was like, oh my goodness, I could go back to academia, like even at, when I'm older. And so now I'm back in academia because I really was like, all these permaculturists and eco people talking about trees create rain. Is it really scientifically true? So that's why I kind of came back to academia to kind of do more of the rigorous science. And that's what I'm doing now. And I'm hoping to get some papers out. And as I was kind of delving into it, because the eco people were complaining that there was no scientists. I mean, there was a couple that people knew about, Anastasia Mekarieva with her biotic pump and Milan. But apart from that, it seems like there wasn't very much. It didn't seem like people were talking about. But as I delved, I was like, oh my goodness, there's a whole world of scientists. So like Manabe, who got the Nobel Prize for climate because he kind of discovered the whole greenhouse warming coupled with the water vapor idea. So he kind of birthed the whole modern climate movement. He got a Nobel and he built the first climate models in the 60s and 70s that actually had soil that absorbed the rain and then they put it back into the sky and it shifted the rainfall. So already back then, the very early climate models already discovered this effect. And Jules China, who actually was the person who brought the whole climate movement into the larger world with the China report in 1979, that probably birthed the whole modern climate movement. He also did work and showed in the Sahel that the vegetation affected the rainfall. So like maybe two of the biggest 5 names in climate science have done work in this water thing. So it's not like but it's somehow all this is fragmented, the climate science. So that part of the field didn't get as much attention. And, Chani gave birth to, he had a student, Shukla, who then did a model of the whole world where he paved over the whole world and found the rainfall decreased by half. So he started this whole institution called the Center of Oceans, Land, and Atmosphere because he thought you need all 3 to understand the climate. And so they birthed all these projects, international collaborations between different continents and scientists, like the Soil Wetness Project, which looked at soil wetness influence the rain. But what's interesting is that all those international collaborations, I don't think anyone, or most of the people in eco permaculture don't know about all these massive collaborations and institutions. And I don't think any of them know about all these techniques, or most of them don't know about like terraces and slowing the water down. And these things, if done in a massive scale, will totally shift these models because if you hold the slow water, if you hold the water from the wet season into the dry season longer, then you have more water to transpire up. And so it's going to shift the whole climate into the dry season with more rain. So what I think is that all these scientists, there's hundreds of scientists I discovered and some of the interview in my podcast, like that are discovering this, but they don't know that there's also eco people. So I think one of the next stages of this larger movement, and I'll feel like the water movement is where the soil movement was 10 years ago, is to bring these scientists and the eco people together. And that's where I start. And I'm going to have a book that's coming out very soon. It's called Restore the Rain, where actually it's kind of like a book documentary of the movement of all the different scientists. And there's multiple lineages of scientists and also all the eco people who are doing the water recycle restoration. So like, for instance, it'll cover like, say in Africa, they chopped down a lot of the trees when the French came colonized, and then a lot of the native people there chopped it down further. And so it dried up the whole Sahel. And so they had troubles replanting it first. But then there's this old technique called the Zai pits that the Africans had. And so that started happening in Burkina Faso, a country there. And it got refound, these techniques there. And so they found that it's like basically a little divot in the ground that captures the water as it flows in, and they put some manure in. And so then that actually allowed the trees to grow. So different trees and wheat, grasses, and cereals that previously hadn't, because they didn't have the water part of the equation. They just planted seedlings. A lot of the stuff died. So what was key is to have these water techniques. And so it just started spreading. And so the one guy, Sawago, he discovered this in the 70s and 80s. And his villagers all thought he was a madman. And he just kept promoting. And finally, it started taking off in other villages. And then other NGOs found about it. The United Nations brought him in. And so he got more recognition, and the NGOs then started spreading it. And so these techniques kind of started reinvigorating this whole previously failed replantation of the Sahel region. And then they actually birthed this whole Great Green Wall project in Africa. And so there's many projects. Some are more top down, some are more bottom up. And so it's mosaic of replantation efforts. And the ones that actually work better are the ones that actually use the better water restoration techniques. And the ones that actually have community organized processes where the people have ownership in the land. And then there's other things, it's called the half moon techniques also, where there's a big half moon about 3 feet, 6 feet across, and it's a little bit sloped so it can capture the water. And then you can actually plant multiple things, and you can actually have some zai pits, these smaller circular ones next to it. And so you can plant, say, trees, and you can have polycultures with them. And so they capture, and you have hundreds of these across the landscape, or thousands. Sometimes you see 5 by 5 mile grids of these. And so they just capture all the water. And then you see all the landscape restoring. And in Chad, the refugees partner with the locals, and they're given some land and then they restore it with these techniques. And so so in this whole mosaic, the ones that are kind of using the techniques are really taken off in this whole Great Green Africa thing. And and this scientist like Martin Clausen, he's a meteorologist. He studied what happens if he found that in his models that the Sahara could actually turn green. Like it has 2 different states, one more desert like one, a more foresty one. And we've kind of tipped it towards more of the forest in the Sahel region. And he was looking back in the things, and there are actually crocodiles in the Sahel still living today. And there's all sorts of cave paintings about giraffes and all sorts of creatures. And so it actually used to be really rich 6,000 years ago, or 6,000 BC. And then the wobble in the planets changed it. So it helped tip the climate. But then it was also the people probably tipped it even more. And so now we actually have a more desertified area there, but it doesn't have to be. And other scientists have too, like Yassir, Yakur, and Avasar. They did models of the whole Sahara and what happens if you reforested, and actually changes the atmospheric patterns. And so it would actually bring in more water. So the winds will blow in, carrying more rain. And so that's what the biopump idea of Macariva is with the Amazon. It can actually shift the wet season, come in early, and then wrong food discovered in the Congo too. And these guys discovered in the Sahel and Sahara that it can also shift the wind patterns to bring in the rain. And so what's happening now with this massive restoration effort in the Great Green Wall is that the rains have come back, but it's hard to decipher because global warming is also affecting the rainfall and the ocean currents affect it. Decipher how much is the land restoration affecting the rain, but the rain is increasing in that whole area. So that's my share.
Awesome. Brilliant examples. And it never ceases to amaze me. All around the world, especially in drier places, there's stories of the indigenous people managing landscapes in this way. And in fact, I just learned about the Apache doing this in New Mexico 2,000 years ago. And you can actually see all the old traditional Apache structures in LiDARs and all of this. And it's same exact kind of strategies applied again and again all around the world. And that leads us to our next presenter, Erica Guys, who has a wonderful book with a brilliant title called Water Always Wins, and has really been sharing just a message of hope amongst disaster and crisis about how these things can change.
This woman is a Madan person from the Mesopotamian marshes of Iraq, where I visited in 2018. And she is part of a 9,000-year-old culture of people who have lived with water, accepting water as it is rather than trying to control it. And in researching Water Always Wins, I went to around the U.S., China, Peru, Kenya, England, India. And in all these places, I met people who are innovating ways to work with water to reduce drought and flood rather than trying to control it, which is sort of what many people are more used to around the world. And here is a picture of their community halls. These are called Bus, and this is built from Phragmites australis, which is a reed that's like 20 feet tall that's invasive in a lot of parts of the world, but it is native to the Mesopotamian marshes and it grows really fast. And so, many storied civilizations have come and gone around the Medan over 9,000 years, many of them irrigated civilizations. But, when those civilizations fell, the waters retook their marshes again. And today, the Medan's way of life is threatened by upstream dams in Turkey and Iran that are withholding water. Nevertheless, they continue, and I feel like the longevity of this culture really has something to tell us in terms of looking to collaborate with water rather than control it. And that was a theme in all of I came to think of them as water detectives because they really approach water with a sense of curiosity all around the world. And instead of asking, what do we want? What do we need? They're asking, what does water want? And how can what we need, mesh with what water wants? And so one I came to realize that I think a lot of people don't understand is the extent to which we have altered the natural water cycle around the world. So people have drained or filled up to 87% of the world's wetlands. We've dammed and diverted 2/3 of the world's big rivers, encroached on floodplains in an area the size of Ukraine just since 1992. Land area covered by cities has doubled since 1992. We've cut 1/3 of the world's forests. So I've come to think of this as really the great drying, all of these ways in which we are drying out the land, rushing water off the land. And in fact, recently scientists have discovered that sea level rise, a lot of it is actually due to this great drying and rushing water off the land, more than melting glaciers, some think, probably like 15% of sea level rise. So anyway, these water detectives, these people around the world who are seeking another path are asking a very different question, which is, what does water want? And what I came to understand is that what water wants is a return of these slow phases that are particularly prone to our destruction. So that's wetlands, floodplains, mountain meadows, and forests. And I came to think of this as the global slow water movement. So every place is unique. Every place has different geology, ecology, and human culture. But I did find some common themes in the slow water movement. Like the slow food movement, solutions are unique to each place, seeking to work with local geology, biology, and culture. They involve systems thinking rather than single focus problem solving. They're distributed across the landscape, many small projects instead of big centralized projects. Ideally local, working within the local water cycle availability. They are socially just. So a lot of people with that kind of single focus problem solving, you're worried about flooding, you build a levee, you build a seawall, you're worried about scarcity, you build a reservoir, you bring in water from somewhere else. In fact, building a levee might protect one community, but it's raising the water level in the river and pushing increased flood risk onto a neighboring community. And dams have brought water to 20% of the world's population, but have decreased water availability to 24% of the world's population. And then lastly, slow water projects are community facing or engaging. So sometimes communities are coming together with their neighbors and building these projects, like what Alpha was talking about in the Sahel. Or at minimum, there's an educational component where maybe you're returning a floodplain within a city, taking away a big derelict industrial development, turning it into a community park, and there's signage explaining to people what is happening in that area. So the story I want to tell is about the Southwest, but I just briefly, I don't know how many of you know Yu Kongjiang or Kongjiang Yu. He was a world famous landscape architect based in China. He's Chinese from China. He got his PhD in landscape architecture at Harvard, and he is the proponent of the sponge cities idea, which has really gained a lot of worldwide fame over the last decade or so, and many places around the world are replicating it. And Tragically, he died last week, I believe, maybe 2 weeks ago, in a small plane in Brazil, working on a documentary about water projects. So I just briefly wanted to show you his vision. This is a park in a city in southern China. And his idea was like, urban sprawl is very impermeable. And we've seen this massive uptick in urban flooding and also water scarcity because cities' responses is to rush water away. And so this is what the same park looks like in flood. So the water has a space to go and is able to slow and infiltrate. And Kongjiang would talk about big feet aesthetics. And what he was saying was that like we have developed these ornamental landscapes that are purely decorative, but in fact, what we need are landscapes that work, landscapes that are beautiful, but also are absorbing floods, absorbing carbon, providing clean water, able to grow food within the city. So not so many people know that, in fact, Kongjiang had a global view, which he called Sponge Planet. So he was definitely looking beyond the city to the wider watershed. Sometimes you can reduce flooding in a city by returning marginalized farmland to the floodplain above the city and helping slow that water down. So you're not having all of that peak water coming into the city at one time. So this is an article that I co-authored with him earlier this year, actually January of this year. And it talks about kind of the commonalities between the slow water movement and his Sponge Planet vision. So if any of you know Kongjiang's work, if you know about sponge cities, I encourage you to read this article about Sponge Planet and get a better idea of his vision to counteract that degree at which we have altered the water cycle globally. Just briefly, this picture with the purple flowers is my yard in San Francisco. I converted it to native plants starting 20 years ago. If you have a small piece of land, this is a great thing that you can do. Get rid of your lawn, which is the largest irrigated crop in North America, and give water a place to infiltrate. And also, I switched my yard to native plants because I don't water. This requires zero watering ever. These plants are adapted to this area. So anyway, just something to think about. And then this picture on the right is a bioswale in Vancouver, which is a way that cities are building lots and lots of distributed things like this across the city to grab some of the stormwater runoff and help it not flood. So just briefly, the project I wanted to talk about is in the Southwest. And, there's a massive mega drought in the Southwest of the United States. 40 million people depend on the Colorado River, which is producing less water than it did last century. And climate change is definitely a factor. We hear a lot about that. But also the great drying, the way in which we have radically altered the landscape by killing beavers, cutting forests, draining wetlands and streams, hard grazing that has denuded the land and killed life in the soil. So I wrote a story for Popular Science magazine about some landowners who moved to southern Arizona in the late 1980s and saw this kind of devastated land. And when the monsoon would come, the water would just rush off, and it was causing lots of erosion. And so they just started like putting little rocks across their waterway to slow the water, to capture sediment, to try to reverse erosion. And what they learned was that this is actually an indigenous technique that had been practiced across Mexico and the Southwest for thousands of years. And there's this graphic shows different versions of it with different names. And the one that you use depends on how narrow your stream is and how steep the slope is. But when you desiccate the land in that way, drought begets drought, right? You don't have the soil and the plants transpiring more water, more rain. And so you're just amplifying that drought response. And that's something that's well understood in the science. And so anyway, they found that this was incredibly effective. And within a few monsoon seasons, that dry wash looked like this. And it had a permanent stream again. And so downstream landowners were like, oh my God, they're holding on to our water. We always have that scarcity mindset, right? Or a lot of people in the dominant culture do. And so a physical scientist with the USGS named Laura Norman was like, wow, this is really interesting. I'm going to study this. And so what she discovered was this stream was actually producing 28% more water than it did before. Now, why is that? If you have water that's just like rushing over rocks in a hot climate, a lot of it is evaporating in the moment. But this is slowing the water. It's helping the water to infiltrate where it can then continue to supply the stream throughout the year. In fact, scientists were able to restore fish to the stream. Bears come and swim in it. And thanks in large part to Laura's science, this has now spread across Arizona state lands, the Forest Service, Utah, Colorado, California. And so I asked Laura Norman, what if we were able to do this across the West, across the Southwest? Could this really heal the land-water relationship and reduce this land-based desertification? And she said, yes, absolutely, without hesitation. So I want to wrap up my time, but just give you a couple more things I've been working on lately. This is an article I wrote for Nature Water earlier this year about climate models and how they are not adequately representing the role of land and land health, the land-life-water relationship in climate stabilization. So there's a lot of interesting food for thought there. And this is an article I wrote for Scientific American that was published in April about the Army Corps of Engineers, which is arguably like the ultimate in water control. And for about 20 years, they've had this engineering with nature division, which I kind of thought, yeah, right. So I took a deep look at it and, they definitely have a kind of engineered mentality, and it's not the same level of land restoration that we're talking about here, but they are so massive and they really shape the land, not just in the United States, but like in 120 countries globally. So, what they do matters. And in fact, nature-based solutions are globally gaining traction, as is evidenced by Army Corps embracing them. And now the question is like, what do we mean by that? And so I think the work that we're all doing can help explain so that what the projects that we see, the slow water projects, are real legit projects and not greenwashing. So here are a few versions of my book, Chinese version, UK editions. And if you want more information, some of my interviews and whatnot are at slowwater.world.
Fantastic. Thanks, Erica. And also, we've put the links down below for Erica's website, Judith's website, Alpha's website, and Ali, I'll post your LinkedIn profile and your website there too.
Great presentation. Thank you so much for that, Erica. And next up, we've got another great articulate spokesperson for the water cycle, for the non-human beings, for the living ecosystem all around us. And he has a great newsletter as well, Regenesis, Ali bin Shahid, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Zach. So I'll start off with first of all, thanking everyone that are here. I remember I came to water cycles and all this. I started my permaculture journey in 2013, and I was a student of Larry Kahn, whose lineage is directly from Manasoba, Fukuoka. So I was in a way uh, sort of like from the Fukuoka mindset. But I come from an engineering background, so my initial questions were always like this: okay, how much of this would improve such and such thing? And while I was doing this, I came across the work of Alpha and Zach, and it was amazing to me for me. And it reminded me of verse from Quran, which goes like this: "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Alam nakhluqkum min ma'in mahin? Did we not create you from humble and slow water? فَجَعَلْنَاهُ فِي قَرَارٍ مَكِينٍ. And then we made a place for it. إِلَى قَدْرٍ مَعْلُومٍ, for a specific time. فَقَدَّرْنَا فَنِعْمَ الْقَادِرُونَ. And we are indeed the best givers of properties. And that reminded me of 4 principles of basically the slow water movement, that you need, first of all, you need slow water, then you need a space for that water. Then you need a time for that water to stay in that space. And then you also need the correct properties, that i.e. the correct life that will grow from that point. So with this, I begin sort of this talk. This picture is from my daughter. She made this 2 years ago. Sort of like gives me a lot of hope, as well as the urge to find out the kind of like tripping points or trigger points where we can do all of the things that can bring back the balance. So the first the story that I'll go through is this basically started off from one of my friends who asked me to do a study on tipping points in Amazon rainforest. And I was studying this, and I looked at the data from NOAA and rainforest deforestation data. And I found out that the winds are coming from this corridor, and they enter basically from the Balim, where the COP30 would be. And they pass through the Paramarnia region into this small Para region, and then to the Amazon region. This is the Amazon region. And what I found out was that in Balim, the rainfall is 2,900 millimeters. And as it moves towards this Maraba region, it kind of decreases to 1,843 millimeters. And then as it moves inland toward Manaus, it's again at 2,100 millimeters. So you can see directly from that the coastal rainfall is very high in the Balam region, but it kind of like just 200 or 300 kilometers across, it just drops down to 1,843, directly correlating that. So I'll also explain the rainforest. So the deforestation in the Maraba corridor. In this region, the deforestation is about 75%. And the rainfall is 2,900 here. It comes here to 1,843, and then it goes to Manaus, which is where it slightly recovers, but it's still not completely recovering. So, and then there was a study done by Malhi and his colleagues, and they found out that for the threshold for a rainforest is 1,800 millimeters. Beyond that, if it decreases further than this, then the rainforest would slightly start transforming into a sauna. And so we did this paper, completed this paper. We published this paper, and I'll share the link with this with you. And then we use this Paramarina corridor to propose for the cooling the climate. There's a group that's working in Amazon region. They're currently trying to fund this project. So they are now focusing on this particular region, which is sort of like a tipping point for this entire Amazon region. So if you can focus on this region, it doesn't require a lot. Like you won't need to completely reforest the Amazon region. You can just focus on this region first, bring in more rain, and then move inland to to the Amazon region and do the work there. These are the graphs for that. This is just showing the same thing that I explained right now. And in this, you can clearly see that in Balam, this is the deforestation level and this is the rainfall. In Moraba, it's about 75% deforestation and the rainfall decreases. And then again in Manwas, the deforestation is at 25% and rainfall is 2,100 millimeters. So that's the first story that I wanted to share. So, and part of the reason when I say that when we have the precision to work on certain spots, we can make changes faster to the climate. We know that life will restore the balance that we have broken, but this sort of gives us another lever to work with, which brings me to the next story. And some time ago, there was about 6 months ago, I met Nastasia, and they were planning to have festivals in Portugal and Spain, music festivals, in which the plan was that they would do the music festivals in the evening, and during the day, the people will work the land. And so I just traveled. I just came back from Portugal. We selected a site based on the same principles that I'm working on, like finding out the most important points that could act as acupuncture points or trigger points for the entire water cycle. And we take the festivals on those points, bring the people there for 5 days. They work there for 4 days, for 4 hours every day. So if you have theoretically 1,000 people coming in, you have like 1,000 into 4. So it's for 3 years, it would be 30,000 hours. So we have 30,000 hours of work, and we choose the strategies. Like one of the strategies, and this is when we were there, we noticed one thing, that the soil was nearly sandy and silty, only 2% clay. It can't hold water. And we were sleeping in this land and camping here. And in the morning, all the clothes were wet. And that brings me back to Judith's story about the dew. And then I calculated the dew and found out that for every meter square, we can get about 42 liters in some months. And the minimum in the driest month, we still can get 8 liters per meter square. So one of the strategies that we are working there is building contour bunds, like sort of like one rock walls that capture the dew from one side when it's rising up. And when it rains, it stops the water. So that was kind of like the trigger strategy for this region. And the first pilot is going to be on next year in September. And all of the stories that Alpha shared, Zai farming, kind of like we're implementing that. We call them rock smiles instead of Zai pits. And likewise, all of those things. So anyway, this festival, after 3 years, we plan to take it to the next trigger point and then to the next. And ultimately, we keep on moving till we can actually start restoring and start planting water in specific places, in the most important places. And then from there, we can hopefully restore the entire water cycle in the Iberian and the Mediterranean Peninsula. So yeah, that was kind of like what I wanted to discuss with you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Amazing. Oh, what is the name of the festival, Ali? Some people are asking in the chat here.
Yeah, it's called 10 Lives. 10 Lives, and I'll share the link with you. Give me a sec. 10livesfestival.com. Let me share the link.
Oh, nice. Someone put it in here already.
Yeah.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much. Super inspiring from all of you guys. Just amazing to see how much is existing, how much is being done all around the world in all different ways. So folks, please feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A. Also, if you want to ask your question with your voice, feel free to raise your hand. But just to get things started out, I'd like to ask a question that maybe we could hear just from each of you guys really briefly. What do you see as the next most important steps for the people here on this webinar? They're on board. They want to do something with this. What do you see as the biggest opportunities that aren't being pursued, or the next thing any one of them could do as an individual, or what are the next big steps we need to move forward in this direction? Yeah, Erica.
Well, the message that I always leave people with is that is something that Judith said, like, this is incredibly empowering, right? This is a distributed solution. So it's something that we can all participate on in our own areas, in our own neighborhoods. So, if you have any small piece of land, even in, a city, there's something, you can transform that yourself. If you don't have land, there are often community volunteer operations, like in city parks, to replant natives and to try to educate people who are doing that work about the importance of slowing water. And, you can often go to city council meetings and try to influence what they're doing around waterways. So there are a lot of opportunities to get involved in, and often like nature and conservation based groups might be doing something around, a waterway or a wetland in your area. So that's another way to get involved with people who are thinking about these things.
Can I pipe up?
Please do.
Okay, so two things. One is I remember Zach being on our land, and he pointed out that, like, just the mere fact of having a house on land means that you are effectively disrupting the water cycle. So it's incumbent on everybody to make up for that deficit somehow. And that has stayed with me, and thinking about it. And just as an aside, I have to say that living in Vermont, I thought I was guilty of thinking that water problems are all over there elsewhere. But we had a drought this summer. And I mean, I felt it physically. My husband and I started really thinking about every drop of water that was used, and we have plants, and which plants are in greater need of it, and how can we recycle water. So it opened my eyes to that reality. And adjacent to that is the fact that different places have different water challenges, and therefore different solutions. And places that have been having water problems for a while are much, maybe, I don't know, further ahead, but they're in that conversation. And I was just at a conference in Charleston, South Carolina, and was amazed by the incredible work that's being done on coastal ecology and working with the water cycle, recognizing that what has been done, which was basically, let's just stop the water. Okay, we just don't want to see it. It causes problems. So, and there's been so much building on the barrier islands. So Charleston, South Carolina is quite extraordinary, actually, in that it has all these barrier islands and marshlands that are buffers for heavy rains. And as the islands had been built upon, the marshlands had been built upon, they're having a lot of problems. They're getting a lot of inland flooding, like when there's no rain, it just starts to flood because the water's been seeping in throughout. And one group that, the people that I originally connected with in Charleston is a group called the Marsh Project. And MARSH stands for Marsh Appreciation and Restoration Society for happiness. And it's a group of, so three dads with young children looked at each other and said, we've got to do something. And it's a really spirited group. Every Saturday, they go to a different neighborhood and look at what opportunities they have to enhance the health of the marshlands and the ability for that spot to take up and hold on to water. And anyway, it was really great. And often these things are going on near you that you don't even know about. So if you don't know what to do, start where you are.
Cool, thanks. I can go. So two things, one locally and one about building the movement. So locally, most of us have at least one of these three issues of floods, droughts, or fires in the area. And basically, there's a water solution to those things. So what you can do in your area is kind of, start building a local movement around that. And that can require networking the different stakeholders, doing education events, all sorts of stuff. So that's locally what you can do. Like maybe having a water story. I don't know if you have water story groups or Erica Geese. I was kind of talking to her about these slow water circles, where people learn from books and videos and stuff. So that's locally. And then globally, in terms of the whole larger water movement, a movement often takes off when different parts of the different demographics, different disciplines, they connect around this issue. And so right now, there's all these different networks. A lot of people are thinking about water. And my guess is this crowd here on this thing is a bit more the eco restoration, land manager, permaculture crowd, right? But and we may not realize in this crowd that there's actually lots of people. For instance, now that I'm in the academic world, there's hundreds of scientists looking at this, and that's one thing that. So in bridging this, what we need are the facilitators, the conveners, the networkers, and so we need to facilitate these events that bring in the 100 of these scientists and 100 of the leading water cycle restoration. Is kind of talk about how you integrate into the models and how the models say certain places should be really important to restore the water cycle. And then there's a whole big, huge climate movement right now. And that is not where the carbon thing, but we can infuse the water part into that whole climate. And so that it can be about carbon and water. And so that's the strategic thing. There's key people you can bring together, maybe key organizations that you find and bring the leaders to talk with the people in the water thing. So find strategically how to infiltrate the water story into the climate movement. That's a huge movement with lots of momentum that can give a lot of movement to this, a lot of momentum to this water movement. And then, I know precipitation recycling, small water cycle scientists who are talking to the FAO, which is the United Nations agriculture thing. And there's climate scientists are discussing how you need agreements between nations about how the rain is generated from land restoration, similar to river agreements. And so this is all kind of nascent, but it's happening. But so we need to bring in that whole government crowd in with our eco restoration crowd. And then the whole business side too is another aspect. So if you're good at designing financial things, because there's a whole these kind of business models that still needs to be done, but how we can, because the yoga world took off when we found a way to employ a lot of yoga people. And I know Water Stories has kind of got this model to employ. And so that's got to take off. The more people we can employ in this and get entrepreneurship into this, that will move a lot of people to align economics and business with the water. So, and that will generate a lot of force once economics and ecology align. Thanks.
Fantastic.
Ollie, do you want to share something here?
Yeah, probably the next point to what Alpha said. We need local movements, and everyone can do his bit. Everyone has the agency to do something, like putting in a rain garden or just collecting the rainwater from the roof. So everyone can do some of the things. But on top of that, we also need to sort of create a community with the scientists to find out the trigger points or acupuncture points so that we can do this work much faster than, for instance, individual efforts or scattered efforts would do.
Yeah, good call. There's one thing I wanted to kind of talk about, even though like we're in a world where there's so much really negative climate news, there's so many underground movements that are succeeding with ecological restoration, like the Global Oceans Treaty. We had Brock Dillman talk about the beaver bill that was signed into California law, the removal of the Klamath Dam. And these are things that groups are doing, that small groups are doing, that are succeeding. But these are efforts that, they're not these international climate efforts, but they're having a huge impact on climate and on ecosystems, but they're done by small groups over years and over decades. And it's sometimes the smaller groups are having the greatest impact, and they're the ones that, like, that are these actionable things that people can do. It's like you're seeing huge impacts, and you sometimes you don't see those successes, and yet those things are having a really tremendous benefit.
And I think too, like, what's motivating for local people to do these local projects is because they get a local benefit, right? I mean, these projects buffer local communities against flooding, against drought, against fire, against heat. And so, they can be motivated to do it for that reason. And then, yes, cumulatively, a lot of scientists are starting to think that vegetation and land management really does matter for climate and has been largely ignored. So, maybe we don't fully know yet the impacts of all of that. But, every little bit at least helps that community, and probably also helps the global situation. And I think too, like the culture of success is contagious, right? Like a lot of these projects are successful when a local person sees their neighbor benefiting from it. So like you look at beavers, which I wrote about in Water Always Wins. For a long time, there was a culture of land managers in the West of like, oh, beavers cause flooding. Oh, they're pests, kill them, destroy their dams, etc. And then, a few of these farmers started welcoming the beavers back. And then they saw like, oh, I don't actually have to irrigate that field because the beaver has built the pond and they've raised the water table. And so then, the neighboring farmer sees that and they want to do it. And similarly, when I was reporting in Kenya, a lot of the smallholder farmers were doing terracing. They were building water pans to capture rainwater off their roofs so that they didn't have to pull irrigation water from the river during the dry season. And, these things were spreading like gangbusters because they see, oh, my neighbor is able to grow an extra crop of green beans and make more money. My neighbor has a successful avocado crop because they're doing this thing. So, I hear what Ali is saying about the trigger points and the acupuncture points, and I think there is a lot of that you can tell by looking at the historical ecology of a place. That is, what did water do before we subverted it? And if you return space to water in an historical floodplain, you have an outsized impact on flooding. Like a project I looked at in Seattle, an urban stream was flooding regularly, and it was like an 11-mile long stream or river, and they returned just 1,600 feet of it to the floodplain. But because those were the historical floodplains, they've completely eliminated urban flooding. So I think there's value to both everything, everywhere, all at once, and those kind of targeted acupuncture points.
Awesome. Well, there are some really good questions here. What do you think, Zach? Should we start with some written questions, or should we do the live question first?
Maybe we just start with a couple of written questions, and I've got one that we always forget to bring up, but the question is a good cue. And then we'll just dive into all of these. So a question from Geffen: any advice for shifting towards a career totally focused on water cycle regeneration? Currently work as a civil engineer and have opportunity to sneak these solutions into my projects, but oftentimes it's just a small piece of the project. Any advice would help. And I would say, just first off, this is exactly why we created the Water Stories core course. There are so many opportunities in these fields, and people just don't know how to get started, how to market themselves, how to advertise, how to get a community of people interested in these kinds of things. That's exactly why we created the course. So the current year's course just wrapped up. We have a self-paced that's available to join anytime. And then we'll do a live course again next year. And we've got probably 40 or 50 people from all around the world that have now made this their full-time career, just doing water cycle restoration work. And we've got hundreds who are doing it part-time or on their own place. So it's really been amazing to see just how quickly this stuff can spread. And if any of our panelists have any ideas as well for folks joining here, maybe they're involved in something auxiliary to water, but they really want to start focusing on it full time. Do you guys have any suggestions for them?
Well, just if you're a civil engineer, I know Keith Vanderhoven, he was working for a dredging company, but they kind of got interested in this restoration project. So now they have this huge greening the Sinai. So he kind of turned his job, this niche thing, into like this huge, like his full-time aspect. So if you are a civil engineer, maybe there's some interesting water restoration that you can kind of get your company to actually pivot around. But you would have to do the legwork to kind of build that idea for it.
It's a great example.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to suggest without knowing the full context. But I guess paying attention, just being alert to aspects of the work that the company does that relate to water and see how you can bring them in. It's basically, I guess that's what Alpha was saying. But the story that he mentioned, Thies Vanderhoven, really interesting work. Started a company called the Weather Makers, and I'm not sure what they're up to now, but it's pretty compelling.
Yeah, I would add one thing to it. So it's like I come from an engineering background, so it's kind of like I can understand a little bit in that sense. So as a civil engineer, you would probably be working on runoffs and infiltration and stuff, how much flood is coming in, and you could probably just work out the same maths with how much a rainwater garden would infiltrate, how much a wetland would infiltrate, and you can just put those elements in places where you feel there's an open ground, rather than just paving it. Just put that thing there. Just show with mathematics that, okay, this is the amount of infiltration that this wetland can do for you, and then you have a structure, like an element which is, in mathematical terms, the same element. It's just doing infiltration. And then you start bringing in nature and as you learn more about the water cycles, maybe do this water storage course, you will understand different elements and then calculate the mathematical value of each of the elements and just put those elements in the places where you could use them as system elements.
Yeah, I would just add the Scientific American story that I shared, a softer core that was looking at the Army Corps of Engineers. They have these practice leads in engineering with nature, and one of them is based in the San Francisco district. And I spend a fair bit of time in that story talking about, they had a flooding problem of a creek in a low socioeconomic area, and they were going to do setback levees, moving the levees back from the narrow stream a little water to give the river more room. But that's all they're going to do. And the way the Corps is set up, they have that single focus, like we want to reduce flooding. But the Army Corps projects always have these local partners or state partners. And the state was very interested in water infiltration because they had a declining groundwater table that the farmers were dealing with. And there was also an endangered species issue with one of the fish. And so this woman, Julie Beagle, who is the project lead, she was able to show that, hey, wait a minute, like to build these setback levees, we're bringing in all of this soil from far away, which is expensive. We have to, if we can dig out some of the, from the incised channel and build sort of like stairs down from the wider levees and shape it in a bit of a natural way. Like we can use that dirt for our setback levees. So we're going to save money actually. And then the stream is going to have access to more of its floodplain, even in lower flows. So it was like a very innovative idea. And she was able to convince them to do it, because, it was cheaper and because, the state funding came from their interest in the water infiltration. So those mixed benefits. So I think, there are a lot of opportunities, and the kind of really narrow way that people are thinking about it is changing. Like a lot of younger engineers that I've interviewed, are very interested in environmental restoration as part of their work. So I think, and there's a couple of university programs. There's one at the University of Georgia and can't remember the other one. Berkeley, definitely, Cal Berkeley. So I think, we are going to see more of that going forward. The question is like, yeah, like some of it is a little bit of greenwashing or still with like a lot of concrete, and are there opportunities to make those projects softer? And I think, the more people working in engineering who have that understanding, the better.
Yeah, I want to add that, you are positioned in engineering, so that can be helpful to bring in all these ideas of water restoration into the engineering sphere, and that's important. For instance, in California, they couldn't pass the gray water laws until someone convened all the water engineers with the permaculture people. And so all these kind of more hippie people met the Stanford water engineers, and that actually awakened them. And then that was part of the reason that the gray water laws were able to change in California. So there's value if you're positioned in the engineering world to bring in those ideas to your colleagues.
I see the one question. I really like this one. It's from, what do we do with all these impermeable surfaces? This is from John. He says, elephant in the room, impervious surfaces, roads, buildings, rooftops. Given these are incentivized, politicized, institutionalized, and these are all desertifying our landscapes. What do we do with them? What do we do with the roads that we've built, with the cities we've made? How do we make these places actually support the water cycle?
Detroit has done something interesting that more places are starting to do, which is that they, every property owner has to pay for part of their taxes go to stormwater management. And so properties that have fewer or a smaller percentage of impermeable surfaces, pay tiered orders of magnitude less because they're contributing less to the stormwater problem. And so that gives them an incentive to put on a green roof or to tear up their parking lot and turn it into, maybe a parking area that's permeable or a garden or whatever. So that's one approach. And I think also, one thing that historical ecologists have really impressed upon me is that we think of city landscapes as really like they're set, they're built, they're not changing. But in fact, building infrastructure turns over a lot. And so if a city can come up with a 50-year plan, a 100-year plan based on historical ecology, understanding where water used to go and therefore where it's likely to go again. And, we see this all the time, like homes built on marshes and floodplains are the first to flood. And, there are papers about if a city chooses to conserve a marsh, they get that return on investment from avoided flood damage in less than 5 years on average. And that benefit can extend 30 miles from the protected wetland. So there are a lot of arguments like that can be made, and the city can do this long-term planning so that like when a building, is, going to be taken down, maybe it is worth it to invest in that being a space for water rather than another property that's at risk of flooding.
I agree. It's a real challenge, and I guess addressing it's twofold. One is awareness, that I remember when I was visiting this couple in far west Texas that Catherine was pointing out that every road is a water conduit. So people don't think about it, that every sidewalk, just the extent to which our built environment is impacting water, and that it can be done in a positive way. So she was showing me a road way on, a lot of degraded rangeland, and how she told me the problems that were happening with it. And if it had been a tiny different angle, it wouldn't be flooding all the time and getting washed out. And then I think someone posted Brad Lancaster's website, Rainwater Harvesting, or is it Harvesting Rainwater? I always forget. But his books have very practical suggestions for, if you have this kind of driveway, this is what you can do. And famously, he got the city of Tucson. Yes, thank you. He got the city of Tucson to allow for the cutting of sidewalks.
Curbs, yeah.
Curbs, so that there could be plantings. So fruit trees, there's a food forest in the middle of Tucson. And doing this was illegal, but they have changed their regulations, knowing that it could have this broad benefit to everybody.
And what's really interesting about that too is that there's water scarcity issues in southern Arizona, and so what he discovered is that water running down the street doesn't belong to anyone because it's a waste product. So if you can divert it into your little, through your curb cuts into your little bioswales where you're growing your native plants, it's kind of fair game. It's this magic source of water that was a problem, and now it's being used. And if you visit his neighborhood, it's incredible. It's, several degrees cooler than surrounding areas. It's completely lovely and appealing. And Tucson is not only not criminalized that, they are now promoting it in other neighborhoods. It's a really cool story.
And on that topic, Brad just finished up the Spanish version of his book, which, if it's not, I think it's available already in print form and will be available as an ebook soon. So that's a great way to help spread the stuff as well, especially to your Spanish-speaking friends out there. We're going to do something around this specifically, but great thing for people to know as well, that these great books are available in Spanish now as well.
All right. Oh, I know we can't. It's hard because there's really good questions. I know we don't have enough time to get to all of them. But I'll leave this up to you, Zach. Okay. Should we do one live or just try to hammer out some of these questions here?
Either one. Up to you. I see one question here that I think is a good, just big picture. In a world dominated by technology, are you finding climate change solutions devised by technology specialists as too narrow to be effective, maybe resulting from technologists lacking an understanding of Earth systems? If so, what do you think is a course correction to redirect their enthusiastic efforts?
That's a good question.
Any one of you can go first.
I'd love to point to the unintended consequences of some of these, single focus problem solving. There was somebody who wanted to fertilize the ocean to grow kelp forests because kelp, store carbon, and then they were going to, drive the kelp out to the deep ocean and sink it so that it would, be buried in the sediment and store that carbon, but like not considering the kelp is an ecosystem that supports all kinds of incredible life and actually like protects the coast from storm surges and, the fuel used to drive the boat out to the deep ocean. I mean, you see this with carbon storage, like the plant a trillion trees. I wrote an article kind of taking that down last year, I think, or the year before. It's in Nature Water as well. You see people who are actually cutting intact forests to plant a plantation of pine trees because they grow really fast and they're going to store a lot of carbon. And then you have this narrative that like, oh, tree planting's bad because it decreases water availability. Well, it does if you're planting a bunch of pine trees in a place where they don't belong, and people don't understand that these are actually infiltrating water and they're actually creating the rain. And so I think, it's hard to get people away from that kind of ethos in our culture that's like maximizing efficiency and single focus problem solving. But, trying to put ourselves first, trying to maximize and optimize isn't working because we have degraded such a vast, 75% of land on Earth is degraded. And so we don't have those natural buffers anymore, which is why these solutions are failing increasingly often.
Yeah, I do think this, what you call the single focus. Yeah, it's kind of like there's one vector that the technology improves, but everything is multifunctional, and so it plays multiple roles. So that's kind of forgotten about. So that you cut down trees to plant a solar panel thing, but the trees are playing multiple roles, and so I do think somehow we need to. There's no good way to say this whole paradigm thing, and we need to think about how to language it, but it has to do with this whole multifunctionality concept that permaculturists have helped raise the consciousness, and also the idea of resilience. And so once you understand that the tree is playing 70 roles instead of just one, then you could try to replace that tree role with one thing. It's like, it's very problematic. And like rivers are playing multiple roles, but we've kind of dammed them up to try and supply water. And now hydrologists are finally realizing there's actually movement by the World Bank and others to actually undam rivers now, because they're starting to realize that the rivers play these multiple roles that weren't aware before. And same with desalination. It kind of seems like it will give us more water, but it's actually messing up lots of stuff. And so we're not looking at all the unintended consequences. And it's the same with medicine. We kind of had all these antibiotics, and now we're realizing, oh no, it's actually not good. And because it's killing all the microbiome. And in agriculture, all the synthetic fertilizers seems like a one vector improves the growing, but actually over long-term degrades the soil. And so I feel like these concepts in medicine, in agriculture, fertilizer, in water, in climate, like we don't have a good paradigm, a good word to actually say all these concepts in one word. So it has to do, so maybe we can do some brainstorming. Maybe Ali, probably good for this, like some word that encapsulates multifunctionality and resilience. And kind of whenever we can just bring up this concept to show that this one vector, one single focused technological thing will throw off the functioning of the rest of the system. And so then we can always refer to this, and that will much more clarify, because the whole development of science is causing huge problems in human society.
Elizabeth Sawin calls it multi-solving. I think she has a book called Multi-Solving.
Okay, cool. I didn't know that one.
You can also use fourth law of thermodynamics for that. Odum's law. Life will increasingly it sort of like complex, brings all of the elements together to increase more complexity and increase more energy efficiency. But the system becomes more complex as more and more life goes and becomes more resilient. For one word, I don't know. I can't think of a word right now.
I mean, the one word that's often used is holistic. I don't know if that embraces enough of what you want to convey.
I know in a ton of our documentaries, I mean, we just juxtapose how simple these structures are. Rock dams, log check dams, compared to the over-engineered solutions, which cost tens of millions of dollars. It's just, it's night and day. Like some of the most effective ones we show are built by communities, built extremely cheaply, built out of rocks and logs. And yet they have a bigger benefit than massive mega dams, massive aqueducts. It's just communities working with nature is often the most effective thing that we see and that we capture.
And to add some numbers to that, our colleagues in Slovakia, Mikhail Kracek, Martin Kovac, Jan Pokorny, and the New Water Paradigm team, they found that if they created 5,000 cubic meters of decentralized water retention, they made new water sources of 1 liter per second downstream, minimum 8 to 10 times cheaper than conventional methods. And so just by working with place-based solutions implemented by local people with local knowledge in a decentralized manner, they were able to create new water sources 8 to 10 times cheaper than conventional engineering strategies.
Oh, here's a good question for Ali from Sonia. Sonia's asking, Ali, I'm in Portugal. Where can I find information regarding the acupuncture points you mentioned?
Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of like a combination of multiple things. So first of all, you have to see what are the most important processes in a certain landscape or a region which are causing water to drain away or water to not remain in the soil. That's the first part. So you look at the soil layer, but also you look at the atmospheric layer. So where are the most opportune points where you could get the seed water from and let the life grow? So you're looking at 2 levels, and then the third layer is the groundwater layer, and how much of that water that if you have that water, could actually kind of decrease the surface temperature of the ground layer, so that next time when the clouds come, the lowest condensation level of the clouds could be brought a little lower. So in the large water cycle, you have the orographic lift, and then you can use that orographic lift, for instance, 1 degree. So if there's a 1 degree difference of surface temperature, it corresponds to about 125 meters in terms of the cloud condensation level. It changes that level by 125 meters. So you could actually find by finding those variables which are most important in that particular landscape, you could find out those points. So when I'm working on these things, I'm looking at, okay, what are the most important points in this landscape in terms of what are the most important variables in this landscape, which have the most impact in terms of, for instance, there would be 3 or 4 processes which have a lot of influence on the water cycle. So what do you call it? The rotation. And you find those points, and then you find out how you could change them, and which places will be the most opportune for enhancing those feedbacks, positive feedbacks, and that's how you can work on. It's not just a one recipe. Some places will have groundwater as most important. Some places will have, for instance, in Pakistan, it's the forests matter, but more than forests, if you just have you can just lower the surface temperature by increasing the soil moisture. And initially, you could also do it by borewell harvesting. You could potentially bring the cloud level 200 meters, 300 meters down. So Pakistan is like on a topographic scale, it goes from 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, and ultimately you hit the Karakoram. So it's like a slope. You could actually, just by seeing those variables, bring the clouds down a little lower. And rather than hitting the Karakoram, they could probably be hitting much lower, where there's a lot of ground, bare soil that can infiltrate the soil, rather than at the Karakoram where you have only rocks and then you have floods. I talked about this in my latest post, which is 193, on how Pakistan could solve this problem. But this is for Pakistan. In Portugal, the problem was different. We had, in North Portugal, we had just sandy soil. So we had to find out, okay, how do we find, what would be the most critical processes here which have the most impact in terms of the water cycle? Basically just find out how can you enhance this time and space for water.
Yeah, If I could just jump onto this point too, yeah, and actually Ali and I were discussing acupoints on a previous call to this. So if you think of water as a circulatory system for the earth, it's kind of like our blood circulation, right? So if you have blood not in a certain part of your hand, but you're leaking blood out of your foot or something, and you actually want to work on that foot where it's leaking, it will help improve your hand, even though it's very far away. Or maybe certain nutrients you're supposed to be eating that will nudge your bloodstream back to health. So what you're looking for is a kind of planetary medicine, and that we need to see the water as a whole circulatory system, and that what you do in one place can affect another place. So if, for instance, in Portugal and Spain, I think it's the Guadana River, whatever, that connects Spain and Portugal. So there's this huge fight because the Spanish people are taking more of the water out of the Portugal. But there's an acupoint in the sense there that if you look at how the water circulates, it comes out. If you plant and restore more of the land on that lower Portugal area, southern part, that will actually increase the rain into that river, and that river will have more flow, and then it will kind of shift the debate between Spain and Portugal. So that whole area, it can actually influence. And so it's kind of the initial upwind point that is like an acupoint in that area in Portugal. And so there's very other acupoints. So like, say, in the whole restoring this green cyanide, that if they regreened it, Milan figured out that it would actually affect the rainfall in all of this Africa and Middle East. And in Valencia in Spain, when Milan also figured out that if you actually restore that area, it would affect less flooding in Europe. So there's all these connections. And so I think what we're looking for is there's certain key areas that are driving that circulation of water flow more, and those are places that are particularly important to fund and do large-scale restoration. And also really large places are really important because in biodiversity restoration, if you have an area much bigger, it actually does even more benefits than multiple small areas. And so it's really key that the big water pumps of the world, the Amazon, the Congo, the Russian, the Canadian, and Indonesian rainforests, we really put a lot of effort in restoring those. So we've kind of realized that Amazon, but there's very little effort in the Congo, say. And so just putting effort in where there's less efforts sometimes plays a much bigger effect.
And
I just
connected to that
wanna-
is-
Go ahead.
please. Oh, yeah, I was saying, and connected to that is another point. For instance, it's not really talked about, but the Arctic dams are like stopping the flow of rivers for up to 300%. Like they have the degree of regulation of 300%. Like they can stop water for 3 years. This water was, before that, it was freezing, but now it's not freezing because now it's in a dam. And when that dam water is released, whenever it's generally in the midst of winter, it just creates vapor plumes, which are downwelling forcing agents. They come on the ice, they melt the ice, and that melting of ice creates a lot of freshwater release in the midst of winter, which decreases the salinity, and it affects the AMOC circulation. That AMOC circulation goes further, and it affects the Pacific currents, the air above them, and just changes that thing. And because of that, it affects the ENSO cycles. But on the other side, it also kind of like weakens the polar jet stream, and then it brings in coastal, the equatorial winds, equatorial moisture pathways, and then you have flooding in Europe. You have Rex blocking patterns which block all of that moisture that's coming from the equator. Now, because when the polar jet stream weakens, it cannot act like a wall to stop that, and it just meanders in. So it's kind of like, that's why I mentioned that when you know the tipping points, when you know where are the most important points, you could be doing all of this work, regenerative work that we're talking about, much faster and in a much more impactful way. I'm not saying it's not impactful now. I'm just saying it's probably much faster. We could actually heal the planet in like 15 to 20 years maximum, rather than going the carbon route, which is like 50 plus years.
A follow-up question there, Ali. Noemi's asking about, is there a map that shows kind of these most effective trigger points to work on?
And and that was what Alpha and I were discussing in the previous call, that we need to make that map. We need to have someone fund that or just work on that to create that map. And I'm sort of like working on that on my own. And Alpha is also working on it on our own. But by bringing more people in a crowdsourced way, or maybe just someone funding this thing, we could actually create that entire map with all the atmospheric rivers, the groundwater layer, the current, the way, the places where the phases of water are wrecking. And generally, when water is out of balance, the phases are out of whack as well. A very good example is in Pakistan. There's a lot of humidity and there's also a lot of heat, and no amount of sweating would actually cool you. And this is like what's happening in the climate. When you have a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere, and Earth cannot cool itself down when the heat comes.
Yeah, there's a researcher at the University of Washington named Abigail Swan, and she calls the way in which plant transpiration feeds into the jet stream and the other large mechanisms that are moving vapor around the planet. She calls it eco-climate teleconnections. And so she's done some really interesting work that I think could feed into the maps that Ali and Alpha are trying to make. And there is like a fair bit of established science showing how the Amazon helps to generate rain for Texas, and Southeast Asia helps to generate rain for the Balkans, and the Congo generates rain for Europe. So those kinds of, and Europe being a place where there's a lot of small countries near each other, some scientists there have started to talk about these atmospheric river sharing agreements that would be similar to like on the ground river sharing agreements. So the idea that what one country does to take care of its land to help generate the rain affects other countries is a pretty nascent idea, but one that more scientists are talking about.
Yeah, thanks. I put in the chat this map of the small water cycle, so how the water flows, and it was made by Ruud van der Ent, who I also put a link to, where I interviewed, who made this map.
In continuation of what Erica said, I've seen there's some Austrian Center for Peace which is working on water as a peace thing for bringing peace in the Middle East, and they're kind of like working with the weather makers. But I'm also sort of like working with them in the sense that they're creating water intersection water pathways where one region will have the rivers flowing in, but the other region, the downslope region, is actually creating ecosystems to feed the atmosphere water back into the atmosphere through evapotranspiration, and that closes the loop. So they're creating sort of like mechanism in which one country is tied to the other country. So the river is coming from this place, but the atmospheric river is coming from the other place, and both of them get tied. So if you stop one, the other gets stopped as well. And this is what they're trying to show it to them in the whole Middle East region.
Fascinating. Well, folks, I think we're almost at the 90-minute mark here. Zach, what do you think? Why don't we do one live question and one more type question? That would be a good way to end this webinar, which has been really fantastic and really inspiring so far. So, Asani, I'm gonna allow you to talk here. Hey, Asani, would love to know your questions for the panel. Let's see. Well, she's got to unmute her microphone here, and then, well, if she gets her microphone unmuted, then ask a question. But in the meantime, let's identify a really good closing question here. Besides that, Zach, do you see any, or do any of you anybody on the panelists, Alpha, Judith, Ali, Erica, do you see any questions that you really, really want to answer?
Okay. I saw two questions. One, curious about dew collection. Why is this not more universally used? What low-impact technologies can be employed so anyone can collect dew and spread it into the landscape?
Have been some programs in South America. I'm trying to remember what country. I want to say like Brazil.
Really?
That are basically like use screens to capture that dew. They're like vertical screens, and then the dew runs off like the Namib beetle into a collection. But that's an issue of where they don't have running water because they live in kind of informal developments. So it definitely is being deployed. One thing I wonder about, I mean, it seems like most of the dew collection that happens is pretty small scale and is meeting people's immediate needs. If it were done like to a geoengineering type degree, I kind of wonder how it might negatively impact these larger water cycles and atmospheric rivers that we're talking about. A lot of like cloud seeding, for example, might cause rain in a particular area a little bit, but might take rain from somewhere else. So that's something that I think about when I think about dew collection.
Excellent. Yeah, some really epic videos. I know, like, dew collection in Bolivia and across South America that are so fascinating and interesting.
Namibia actually is, a lot of those because they don't have rain. It's an inversion zone for them.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's the idea. Okay.
And then one that I just am curious, I know my own answer for this, but I'm really curious about your guys' perspective. If it's important and profitable and necessary, then why are these methods still not widely accepted and funded? What do we need for this?
A change of mindset that our entire system is geared towards large, high-tech solutions. I was listening to a podcast interview yesterday, and it was about, all the different energy and solar and nuclear, and the amount of money that this guy was talking about, what this will cost and what's going into this. I was stunned because I'm so much more oriented towards a few people in a community get together and figure out how to hold on to water. So, and just, I've been around long enough to see that those big, expensive, large-scale efforts don't work and end up undermining the systems we're trying to bolster. So somehow that is where the money goes and the attention goes and most media stories go. So if I knew how to shift that, I'd be on it.
I mean, it is shifting. Like I've been covering this for more than 15 years and it's become way more mainstream and widely known all over the world, different people, kind of independently working on it and then also sharing resources. So I would say, and there's like a really vastly growing body of science that is showing that these things work. And that gives people kind of the ammunition they need to convince decision makers. So, it is early, I would say, in the transformation, but I see that it is happening. And part of that is because, the way that we have been doing things is failing increasingly often, and people see that. And after my book was published, I was invited to give keynote talks to like the American Water Resources Association annual conference and the Illinois Floodplain Managers Conference. So, places with like a lot of engineers and water utility managers, and they're basically inviting somebody to give a keynote who's telling them like, you're doing it all wrong. You have to change, right? So the fact that they were open to that, I thought was interesting. I think we are at a tipping point, and I think the more we kind of are able to do these projects and see their success, and people see them and want to have that in their own places. That's how it spreads. And just since we're wrapping up, I wanted to add that I'm so honored to be on this panel, and I read all of you guys, Alpha, Raleigh, Judy, Zach, and Ali all the time. You guys are all like a major source of information for me. And you're all doing such interesting work and projects. And anyway, I love learning from you. And it was really cool to be on this panel with you guys.
Thanks.
Glad to have you, Erica.
Thank you, Erica.
Yeah, I want to kind of add some. Yeah, so I feel like there has been a huge shift. Like as we're watching, I remember with Nick Stein, we're looking on LinkedIn like a couple of years ago. No one was talking about, just me and Nick, and then suddenly all these people on LinkedIn are talking about water, and you can kind of track it down on Substack too. Like suddenly all these people are talking about water, and I think it spreads. You see more people, and I'm also really interested in cultural evolution, and they did studies where which pop song became popular isn't really sometimes depend on the pop song. It's just that who's talking to who. And so there's self-feedback loops that kind of bring things bigger. And I think it's true for evolution of history too. So there's certain movements that we watched grow, like yoga was a cult, but now is mainstream. And soil, a healthy soil has kind of gone semi-mainstream in the last 10 years. And, the carbon movement was itself, weird, like in the 70s and 80s. And so it kind of builds this feedback. As more people talk to it, it talks to more funding, and the funding comes in, and then more scientists study it, which talks to more people working on it. And so it beats its own avalanche. And so I feel like, this water movement could have been the one that took off earlier, or could have took much, much later. But it's, it's kind of up to us to kind of create it. And, and it is kind of amazing because I feel like it's small enough that, like a lot of those people here on this panel, I feel like we you can do measurable progress. And, I just jumped in and I didn't really know anything, 4 or 5 years ago. And now I feel like I'm suddenly in the center of it. And I feel like a lot of people on this call, like you have certain disciplines that you're probably good at, or you could bridge different silos of this water thing, like government and water or business and water. And so you play a really big key role. It's a small enough movement that if you figure out your niche, you can kind of actually help really grow this much bigger.
Thanks, Alpha. For me, it was mainly Erica and Alpha, which actually brought me to this, and then Zach in this space. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
And I think big picture, we see that it's changing very quickly in a private sector, on a home level, on an individual, on a community level. And government is the last to adopt any of these big changes. And so we're kind of following the expected trajectory to some extent, that you have these innovators creating examples, then replicators doing it more and more. It starts to spread more and more. And eventually you get more logical policy, which also is happening all at the same time. Granted, it's not happening everywhere yet, but it's happening in some places. And so we're really cresting this wave of change. And I think it's easy to look at it and say it's not happening fast enough. And then when you step back and look at the last 5 years, you think, oh, wow, this is actually happening really fast. So sometimes it takes a little perspective as well.
Yeah, hope together we can shift the collective, economy from trillion-dollar data centers to actual people working on the landscape, restoring the water cycle. And that's the impact that we all want to make here. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning into this fantastic webinar. Thank you, Zach, for hosting. Thank you, Alpha, Judith, Ali, and Erica for donating your precious time, your energy, and your brilliance. We appreciate everyone who's part of this movement. We hope to talk with you further soon, and we hope to really hear your stories about how you're helping restoring ecosystems in the water cycle, because I know we're all doing a part, and we're part of this drop in the ocean together.